Good evening and thank you for joining me. Extraordinary scenes in the heavy end of our print media last week, a concerted and extremely well-funded attack on the ABC, which said a lot more about the power of moneyed propaganda than it did about Auntie. And that's what interests me. Deep in the heart of what Paul Keating dubbed basket-weaving territory, in an ante-room of the Balmain Town Hall, inner Western Sydney, need I say, there was a telephone booth-sized meeting convened under the slogan, "Their ABC or Our ABC." The them was ABC staff and loyalists, the us was, at first blush, the usual coterie of harmless duffers sucking up to the big end of town. So what? An ineffectual drone fest of the same old, who cares? Well, the serious Murdoch and Fairfax prints, that's who. And they cared a lot. Now, one explanation for that is that the broadsheets are keen on anything about the ABC because their market research shows a commonality between their readers and the ABC audience. But there's more to it than that. And it's to be found here in Collins Street, the big end of Melbourne, need I say, at the headquarters of the right-wing propaganda organisation that is pleased to call itself the Institute of Public Affairs. And who are they? Well, their website boasts an endorsement from Bill Hayden, enough said, and declares that
our aim is to promote an understanding and appreciation of the free society and free enterprise.
Gosh, almost said free world there.
And in so doing, to advance the interests of the Australian people,
as determined by their betters, us.
In short, the IPA is liberal with a small l in outlook.
That's Rupert Murdoch's description of himself too. Rupert's one of the obscenely rich people behind the IPA.
Market-oriented in its approach and seeks to promote general interests rather than sectional ones.
Generally vested interests, but I'll come to those. Each year the IPA spends about $1 million on propaganda, pushing the hard right line on
deregulation,
economic policy,
Indigenous issues,
and
environmental policy.
The names on the IPA's board are harbingers of its message.
John B. Prescott, Horizon Equity.
Late of BHP,
Harold and William Clough,
West Australian Newspapers,
Rio Tinto Limited,
BHP Limited,
Western Mining Corporation,
the Shell Company of Australia Limited,
AMP Limited,
Philip Morris Australia.
Casino owners are well represented, along with the miners, tobacconists and moneylenders. But why do they want to spend all that money bashing the ABC? That's, if you can call a slap with a limp wrist, a bash.
One of the key reasons why public debate is so corrupt in this country, why our intelligentsia has become so corrupt, is that our national broadcaster is so tainted. Far from being an oasis against such sins, it exemplifies and seeks to enforce them.
This spellbinding orator is Michael Warby, who rejoices in the title of Fellow of the IPA. That doesn't mean he's a member of a learned society, it means he's a salaried mouthpiece.
Australia cannot afford a national broadcaster that systematically avoids accountability of the quality of its product, that too often substitutes propaganda for journalism and history, that too often misrepresents past and present, that too often fails miserably to be a mirror to ourselves, all in order to serve the moral vanity of its staff.
Lectures on moral vanity from a popinjay, it's not often one can use that word accurately, are always worthwhile, but from Michael Warby even more so. Warby will not quickly be forgotten at the Age, for which he penned this fearless expose on Jane Fonda's Vietnam War treachery.
Some of those POWs remember Fonda very well. They have reason to. Because of Fonda, some never came home.
And he then reports that Fonda visited American prisoners in Hanoi who gave her secret messages.
She turned to the officer in charge and handed him the little pile of notes. 3 men died from the subsequent beatings.
Quite a story. Jane Fonda the murderer. Why haven't we heard it before? Because it's a lie. It didn't happen. From the Age 2 days later,
there is nothing for it but to apologise. I got it wrong. I did not check my facts. The specific incident of the beatings did not happen.
And the weasel excuse,
A classic example of how we get bitten by urban myths.
No, Mr. Warby, we get bitten by deplorable journalism, such as yours. Spare us your hypocrisy about the moral vanity of ABC staff. Despite all that, ABC Radio gives Warby a regular spot on 3LO Melbourne, forgiving to a fault the ABC. The Age is harder-headed and dropped him. In his railings against the ABC, Warby intones the IPA mantras.
The ABC is a staff-captured organisation.
The ABC is biased as a result of this staff capture.
And you release the captive, removing its bias quite simply. Free enterprise on a white horse.
It should be privatised.
At the time Fairfax was showing him the door, Warby v the ABC popped up in IPA backer Murdoch's Australian.
A staff-captured organisation.
And in the Adelaide Review, editor Christopher Pearson. Remember that name.
Which group or institution in Australian public life engages in behaviour most worthy of contempt?
Is it the ABC?
The IPA line on the ABC gets another run in the Oz, this time from Michael Nahan, its executive director.
It is a workers' collective run by a clique of ageing baby boomers.
The ABC is a form of middle-class welfare.
Hold that thought, it resonates later. Next speaker at Balmain was Michael Duffy. Murdoch gives him regular space too.
Most of the ABC could be sold off without affecting the future of any of its programs which have an audience.
It provides massively subsidised middle-class entertainment.
News and current affairs attract an audience of mainly middle or upper-class people.
The IPA intellects are appalling snobs. They believe, God knows why, because it isn't true, that ordinary Australians simply don't watch or listen to the ABC, and right now, the hoi polloi are watching Ally McBeal, Who Wants to Be a Millionaire, and South Park. It's pretty offensive.
The fact is that the people in Parramatta have to cop ads with their television and the people in Paddington don't. It's middle-class welfare. No wonder the audience likes it. Everyone likes getting something for nothing or very little. But I don't see the reason why the taxpayer should be subsidising what is, as someone referred to earlier, often, in terms of the number of people watching it, a branch office of the BBC.
Tonight, the Nine Network has American and British culture exclusively from 7:30 to 10:40. 7 has a franchise British quiz, then American culture exclusively till 11:30. 10 has a program about ants, then more American shows until 10:30. And SBS has British soccer, US anti-culture, news, and Hong Kong culture. The ABC, since the 7 o'clock news, has exclusively Australian material until midnight, though Four Corners was taking one of its too frequent breathers. And is Michael Duffy not another IPA hypocrite? His contempt for subsidised middle-class culture ought surely to extend to his own commercial activities. He's a book publisher, and thanks to grants from the Australia Council, Duffy's spent $30,000 of taxpayers' money flogging his products overseas, $22,000 and another $8,000 odd this year. Christopher Pearson, you haven't forgotten his name, is a member of the Australia Council. More from him anon. Duffy, like Warby, is also a regular guest on ABC Radio, 2BL in Sydney. One might rhetorically suggest that if the ABC advocates decency, the IPA will demand equal time for indecency. Its propaganda mill never stops, spewing out not just pamphlets about the ABC, but pushing uranium mining against Aboriginal land rights. This one's by David Barnett, husband of Prue Goward, against land rights per se, for tobacco, whose opponents are, according to the Philip Morris-funded propagandists, New Puritans. Alan Moran subheaded his paper,
Costs and Benefits of Smoking,
but was unable to point to any of the latter. Just on that subject, this is Donna Staunton of the AMP. She's an IPA board member and formerly a paid apologist for Philip Morris and CEO of the Tobacco Institute. She takes the somewhat courageous stance that tobacco is not addictive.
And I think the fact that it's habit forming as opposed to addictive is borne out by the number of people who stop smoking without any external assistance at all.
Next speaker was Prue Goward, a former ABC journalist, wife of the aforementioned David Barnett, and perhaps not the clearest thinker I've ever heard.
opposing injustice, environmental degradation, opposing poverty and personal greed, standing up for victims and the rights of minority groups, uncovering corporate corruption at every turn, and vigilantly revealing the shortcomings of our democratically elected leaders all seem such admirable purposes. I have often wondered why the ABC has ever bothered to deny that they are amongst its core values and objectives. But these values and objectives also fit, when taken as a whole, with a philosophy that also opposes free speech, free enterprise, private property, and seeks to replace them with state ownership and control.
Just in case you found that hard to follow, those who oppose injustice, she says, are the same people who oppose free speech and democracy. That's a syllogism of the Hitler was a vegetarian, so all vegetarians are fascists variety. And still the IPA mill churns it out in favour of casinos whose owners are IPA supporters, in favour of genetically modified food, against the Kyoto Agreement, and of course against that benighted provider of middle-class welfare, helped along by David Barnett.
The ABC believes in Aborigines, the environment, gays and lesbians, and gun control.
And your point is? The IPA's against them. Thought so.
Bias on the ABC is now so institutionalised as to have become the norm.
It was that notorious vegetarian who wrote,
The broad mass of a nation will more easily fall victim to a big lie than to a small one.
what the IPA don't do is adduce any evidence of this bias. A somewhat difficult task given that their mouthpieces are prominent speakers in ABC programs. Just time to squeeze in the last two IPA toadies. First, Christopher Pearson, failed speechwriter to John Howard.
Significant sections of its operation have been subject to staff capture, and I'd like in passing to note with gratitude the extensive work done on this question by Michael Warby.
Michael Warby said it, it's the IPA mantra, so it's good enough for me to join the chant. Pearson is nothing if not IPA referential.
The IPA research is timely in reminding us of how set in its ways ABC management is, how deep the condition of denial about its various delinquencies.
He names none. The major financial contributors to the IPA include Rio Tinto and Western Mining, Philip Morris, and, troublingly, Telstra. News Limited, another donor, also donates a great deal of space on its op-ed pages to the cause of which Murdoch is a member. Last and perhaps least of the IPA advocates was that silly old sausage, Paddy McGuinness. Paddy was unhappy at insensitive ABC broadcasters who stumble over non-Anglo names.
But there is continual stumbling over names because they're not Anglo, or names which have, say, more than 3 or 4 syllables. I don't understand why. I mean, that is a kind of blind arrogance in itself.
And then what does the silly goose do? Watch him.
Then Franco Papandreou.
Can happen to anyone, Paddy. The IPA has one song to sing on the ABC. They can't back any of it up with proof of bias, but we're all supposed to accept that assertion as unquestionably true. It isn't. Yet the monotonous propaganda from this tiny, tight coterie of otherwise negligible hypocrites, muddle-headed wombats and mercenaries achieves phenomenal success, blanketing the opinion pages of the qualities meretriciously demanding to be taken seriously. It's a great testament to the power of money in our media. You have to admire their presumption, don't you? Good night to you.
Thursday on Radio National, media people and their activities come under scrutiny. Tune in to the Media Report, Thursday at 8:30 on Radio National. Coming up, Backburner.